My boss, Mr. Sterling, glared at me across his enormous mahogany desk. Serafina, he began, his voice like gravel. I'm letting you go. I nodded calmly, feigning a slight tremble in my hands. I understand, Mr. Sterling. What he didn't understand was that this was exactly what I wanted. He was firing me, his loyal and formerly indispensable executive, to make room for his useless, spoiled son, Julian. A son who treated the office like his personal playground and work as a suggestion. But I knew something Mr. Sterling didn't. I'd been reborn. And in my previous life, Julian's incompetence and arrogance, combined with a sudden, catastrophic market crash, had driven Sterling Industries to the brink of utter ruin. Only my insider knowledge, my tireless work ethic, which Mr. Sterling had always taken for granted, and my uncanny ability to predict market trends had saved the company and Mr. Sterling's fortune. This time I was letting the ship sink. Because I also knew that a rare experimental medical treatment, a treatment Sterling Industries owned the patent for, was the only thing that could save Mr. Sterling's life from a rapidly progressing, previously undiagnosed genetic disorder. A disorder that would manifest, in about 3 months. I walked into Alistair's office, a vast expanse of glass and steel overlooking the sprawling city. He stood by the window, his back to me, a silhouette against the dazzling skyline. He was a powerful man, built like a bull, with a silver mane of hair and eyes that could cut through steel. He turned, and the familiar weight of his gaze settled on me. Serafina, he said, his voice devoid of any pleasantries. Sit down. I obeyed, my posture perfect, my expression carefully neutral. I'd practiced this moment 1,000 times in my head. I've made a decision, he continued, his gaze unwavering. A strategic restructuring. It's time for Julian to take on more responsibility. Julian, his son, the embodiment of spoiled entitlement, a walking, talking disaster in a designer suit. He'd joined the company 6 months ago, fresh out of an Ivy League school he'd barely scraped through, and had proceeded to wreak havoc with the grace of a bull in a china shop. I'd spent countless hours cleaning up his messes, mitigating his blunders, all while he took the credit and treated me with thinly veiled contempt. And I prompted, my voice betraying none of the turmoil inside me. Alistair steepled his fingers, a gesture I knew meant he was about to deliver bad news. And your position is being made redundant. Redundant. The word hung in the air, cold and sharp, fired. After 5 years of unwavering loyalty, of 80-hour work weeks, of anticipating his every need, I was being discarded. I understand, Mr. Sterling, I said, my voice remarkably steady. I even managed a small, polite smile. Inside, a cold fire of satisfaction was beginning to burn. Let the games begin. He offered me a manila envelope. Your severance package. It's generous, considering. Generous. I took the envelope, resisting the urge to tear it open and throw the insulting contents in his face. It wouldn't even begin to cover the millions, perhaps billions I'd saved him in my previous life, the profits I'd generated through my foresight and tireless work. Thank you, sir, I murmured, my voice thick with feigned emotion. As I stood to leave, Julian swaggered in, a smirk playing on his lips. He reeked of expensive cologne and unearned confidence. Moving out, Sarah loser? He drawled, his eyes flicking over my simple, professional attire with disdain. I met his gaze, a serene smile still plastered on my face. Good luck, Julian, I said, my voice even and clear. The words were a curse disguised as a farewell. Back in my small, windowless office, the one I'd practically lived in for half a decade, I began to pack my few personal belongings. A framed photo of my parents, gone too soon, even in this life. A well-worn copy of The Art of War, and a small, unassuming succulent that had somehow survived the harsh, fluorescent lighting. I left behind the meticulously organized files, the color-coded spreadsheets, the countless reports and presentations, the invisible architecture of Alistair's empire, built on my sweat and sleepless nights. Let Julian try to navigate that labyrinth. My mind drifted back to the previous life. The flickering neon sign of a cheap diner, rain lashing against the windows. I huddled over a lukewarm cup of coffee, the steam momentarily blurring the image of the newspaper headline screaming about the collapse of Sterling Industries. My phone, long since disconnected, lay cold and useless in my pocket. I'd poured everything into that company, working myself to the bone, navigating treacherous market currents, cleaning up Julian's constant stream of catastrophic blunders. Alistair had initially relied on me, his sharp eyes recognizing my talent, my dedication. But then Julian had arrived, the golden boy, the heir apparent. Slowly, insidiously, my contributions were minimized, my warnings ignored. Alistair, blinded by paternal pride, had handed the reins to his incompetent son. And the inevitable had happened. The company, once a titan, had crumbled. And I, the one who had tried to save it, was left with nothing. Then the darkness, the crushing weight of failure, the agonizing pain, and then nothing. Then light, a baby's cry, my cry, rebirth, a second chance. With all the memories intact, I shook myself out of the memory. This time, things would be different. I'd spent the past few years quietly preparing, biding my time, waiting for this day. I'd used my severance, along with the meager savings I'd managed to accumulate, to secure a small but comfortable apartment in a quieter part of the city, far from the gleaming towers of Sterling Industries. My first priority was financial independence. I knew with chilling certainty that another market crash was imminent. In my previous life, it had been the final nail in Sterling Industries' coffin. This time, it would be my springboard. I began making small, carefully calculated investments, shorting stocks I knew were overvalued, buying up assets that would weather the storm. I also started a blog, The Oracle's Eye, under a pseudonym. I shared my market predictions, offering cautious, well-reasoned advice. At first, it was just a whisper in the vast echo chamber of the internet. But slowly, gradually, people began to listen. My predictions, uncannily accurate, started to attract attention. Meanwhile, Alistair was showing the first subtle signs of the illness that would, in my previous life, bring him to his knees. A persistent cough he dismissed as a cold. Moments of fatigue he attributed to overwork. A slight tremor in his hand that he hid by clenching his fist. I noticed these things, of course. I knew what they meant. And then there was Nora, Dr. Nora Ramirez. In the past, she had headed up a small, underfunded research division within Sterling Industries, a division focused on experimental gene therapies. It was her research, her groundbreaking work that held the key to Alistair's survival. Work that Julian, in his infinite wisdom, was about to dismantle. My early investments were already paying off handsomely. My anonymous blog was gaining traction, attracting a small but influential following of investors who recognized the accuracy of my predictions. I was building a reputation, a network, a war chest. I also kept a close watch on Sterling Industries. News reports, industry whispers, and the occasional panicked email from former colleagues painted a grim picture. Julian was running the company into the ground. He was alienating long-standing clients with his arrogance and incompetence, making reckless investments based on gut feelings rather than data, and generally behaving like a spoiled child playing with a loaded weapon. The company's stock price was steadily declining. One rainy afternoon, I ran into Amelia, a former colleague from the accounting department, at a small coffee shop near my apartment. She looked haggard, her usual cheerful demeanor replaced by a weary resignation. "Serafina?" she said, her voice filled with surprise. "I didn't expect to see you here." "Amelia," I replied, offering a genuine smile. "It's good to see you. How are things?" She sighed, stirring her coffee. "Not great, to be honest. I was let go a few weeks ago. Restructuring, they called it. More like Julian proofing." We talked for over an hour. Amelia confirmed my worst fears about Julian's mismanagement. She also shared a disturbing piece of information. "You know that research division, Dr. Ramirez's team?" she said, lowering her voice. "The one working on gene therapies?" "Yes," I said, my heart quickening. "Julian shut it down, completely. Said it was a waste of money. He even ordered them to destroy all the research data." My blood ran cold. It wasn't just neglect, it was deliberate sabotage. In my previous life, that research had been Alistair's only hope. Now it was gone. Or was it? "Do you know why?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Amelia shrugged. "Officially, it was cost-cutting, but I heard rumors, whispers that Julian resented Dr. Ramirez, that he saw her as a threat. She paused. Or maybe he was just that stupid. Maybe, I said, my mind racing. This changed everything. It made my plan more urgent, more complicated, and infinitely more dangerous. But it also solidified my resolve. Julian wouldn't just ruin his father's company, he would kill him. And I, Serafina Miles, reborn and armed with the knowledge of the future, was the only one who could stop him. And in doing so, I was certain I'd find a much sweeter victory. The market crash arrived with the subtlety of a wrecking ball. One day, the financial world was humming along, fueled by optimism and reckless speculation. The next, it was in freefall. It was exactly as I had predicted, down to the specific triggers and the cascading failures. The global economy shuddered, then buckled. Fortunes vanished overnight. Panic spread like wildfire. Sterling Industries, already weakened by Julian's disastrous leadership, was hit particularly hard. The company's stock price, which had been steadily declining, now plummeted. Major investors, sensing blood in the water, began pulling out, accelerating the downward spiral. News reports were filled with grim forecasts, and the word bankruptcy began to be whispered in connection with Sterling Industries. Inside the company, chaos reigned. Julian, utterly out of his depth, flailed wildly. He made a series of increasingly erratic and desperate decisions, firing experienced employees, slashing budgets indiscriminately, and attempting to negotiate deals with predatory lenders. Each move only dug the company deeper into the hole. He was like a man drowning in quicksand, his struggles only hastening his demise. Meanwhile, my own fortunes were soaring. My carefully planned investments were paying off exponentially. The small apartment I'd bought was now feeling less like a refuge and more like a launch pad. My anonymous blog, The Oracle's Eye, became a sensation. What had started as a small niche following exploded into widespread recognition. Financial analysts, desperate for answers in the midst of the chaos, dissected my every post. I was hailed as a visionary, a financial guru, the Cassandra of the crash. The anonymity only added to my mystique. I relished the irony. The very people who had dismissed me as a mere assistant were now hanging on my every word, albeit unknowingly. Alistair's health, predictably, deteriorated in direct proportion to the company's decline. The subtle symptoms I'd observed earlier, the cough, the fatigue, the tremor, became alarmingly pronounced. His once powerful frame began to wither. His voice, which had commanded boardrooms, became weak and raspy. He started experiencing episodes of debilitating muscle weakness, making it difficult for him to even walk. His sharp mind, the engine of his success, began to falter. Memory lapses became frequent, his concentration shattered. He consulted the best doctors, underwent countless tests, but they were baffled. The rare genetic disorder that ravaged his body was so obscure, so insidious, that it eluded their diagnoses. Alistair, a man who had always prided himself on control, on his ability to bend the world to his will, was now at the mercy of a disease he couldn't understand, a force he couldn't conquer. I watched his decline from afar, a detached observer. I saw the fear in his eyes, the desperation creeping into his voice. He began to realize the magnitude of his mistakes, firing me, trusting Julian, ignoring the warnings. In his lucid moments, he experienced flashes of regret, of self-blame. He tried to reach out to me several times. His calls went unanswered. His emails were left unread. I let him stew in his own juices, savoring the bitter taste of his impending doom. Let him feel the helplessness, the despair that I had felt in my previous life. Julian, meanwhile, was spiraling out of control. His attempts to salvage the company were not just ineffective, they were actively destructive. He secured a high-interest loan from a notoriously predatory lender, putting up the company's remaining assets as collateral. He alienated the few remaining loyal clients with his abrasive behavior and his complete lack of understanding of their needs. He publicly blamed the market crash, the unfair competition, and even his own employees for the company's woes, refusing to accept any responsibility. The board of directors, once firmly in Alistair's pocket, began to turn against Julian. Rumors of a hostile takeover circulated. Bankruptcy loomed like a specter. Julian, increasingly isolated and paranoid, lashed out at anyone who dared to question him. He fired more employees, further demoralizing the remaining staff. He even tried to use his father's illness as a shield, arguing that he needed to maintain control to ensure stability. But it was a transparent ploy, and it only made him look weaker and more pathetic. One afternoon, I met Amelia at a small, out-of-the-way cafe. The rain outside mirrored the gloom in her eyes. "It's worse than I thought," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "He's selling off assets, firing anyone who disagrees with him. It's a bloodbath." "I know," I said, sipping my tea. "But there's something else. Something you told me about the research division. Dr. Ramirez's work." Amelia nodded, her expression grim. "I've been digging, Serafina. Quietly, of course. And it's worse than we thought. It wasn't just cost cutting. Julian deliberately ordered the destruction of key research data. He shredded documents, wiped hard drives, even, I think he may have damaged some of the specialized equipment." "Why?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Jealousy, mostly, and spite. He saw Dr. Ramirez as a threat. She was smart, ambitious, and, well, she had your old job, essentially. She was Alistair's go-to person for anything scientific. Julian couldn't stand that." "Did he know about Alistair's condition?" I asked carefully. Amelia hesitated. "I don't know, I doubt it. He's not that perceptive, but he knew that research was important to Alistair. That's enough for him." We decided to work together. Amelia, with her insider knowledge and her contacts within the company, could gather information and evidence. I, with my financial resources and my growing public profile, could provide support and eventually leverage. It was a dangerous game, but we were both driven by a sense of injustice and a desire to see Julian brought down. And in my case, a complex, conflicted desire to see Alistair survive. Our investigation was hampered by Julian's paranoia and the general atmosphere of fear within the company. But slowly, painstakingly, we began to piece together the puzzle. We found deleted emails, recovered fragments of shredded documents, and interviewed former employees who had been forced out. The evidence against Julian was mounting. Then came the second twist, a development that changed the game completely. News broke that Titan Corp, a rival conglomerate, was making a hostile takeover bid for Sterling Industries. Titan Corp was known for its aggressive, often unethical business practices. They were corporate raiders, notorious for buying up struggling companies, stripping them of their assets, and leaving behind a hollow shell. The CEO of Titan Corp was Marcus Thorne. I'd never met him in my previous life, but I knew his reputation. He was a shark, a predator, a man who thrived on the destruction of others. He was, in many ways, a younger, even more ruthless version of Alistair Sterling. But unlike Alistair, who at least had a flicker of decency buried somewhere beneath his ambition, Thorne seemed to possess no redeeming qualities whatsoever. As I delved deeper, I discovered a hidden connection. Thorne and Alistair had a history. Years ago, they had been involved in a bitter business dispute, a deal that had gone sour, leaving Thorne with a deep-seated grudge. This wasn't just business, it was personal. Thorne wasn't just trying to acquire Sterling Industries, he wanted to dismantle it, to erase it from existence, to destroy everything Alistair had built. This realization forced me to reevaluate my entire strategy. If Titan Corp succeeded, the medical research that held the key to Alistair's survival would be buried forever. Thorne wouldn't care about a niche research project, a potential cure for a rare disease. He'd see it as an unnecessary expense, a distraction from his goal of maximizing profits. My initial plan had been to let Sterling Industries collapse, to let Alistair suffer the consequences of his actions. But now, ironically, I needed to save the company, at least temporarily, to save Alistair's life. The enemy of my enemy, as they say, had become my temporary ally. The situation had become infinitely more complex, more dangerous, and more morally ambiguous. My carefully laid plans were unraveling, and I was forced to improvise, to adapt, to play a game with stakes far higher than I had ever imagined. It was a week after the Titan Corp announcement that my phone finally rang with Alistair Sterling's private number. I'd ignored his previous attempts, letting the calls go to voicemail, letting the emails pile up unread. But this time, something in me shifted. Perhaps it was the urgency in his assistant's voice when she'd left the message, or perhaps it was the grim satisfaction of knowing he was finally at the end of his rope. I answered, my voice cool and detached. Serafina Miles. Serafina. His voice was a raspy whisper, a far cry from the booming command I remembered. It's Alistair. I need to talk to you. I'm listening, I said, offering no encouragement. I've made mistakes, he coughed, a painful, racking sound. Terrible mistakes. I was wrong about you, about everything. A pause filled only with the sound of his labored breathing. I know about my condition, he finally managed to say. The doctors, they say there's nothing they can do. I let the silence hang heavy. There might be something, I said finally, my voice devoid of emotion. An experimental treatment, developed by your own company, ironically. Ramirez's research? He asked, a flicker of hope in his voice. But Julian, he said it was a waste of resources? I finished for him. He was wrong, or perhaps he was lying. Another silence. Can you help me, Serafina? Please, I'll do anything. The plea was raw, desperate. The mighty Alistair Sterling reduced to begging. It was a moment I'd fantasized about, but the reality was less satisfying than I'd imagined. I'll meet with you, I said, my voice firm. But understand this, Mr. Sterling. If I do this, it will be on my terms. The meeting was set for the next morning at his office. Walking into Sterling Industries was a surreal experience. The once bustling headquarters was now a ghost of its former self. Empty desks, hushed whispers, and the palpable air of defeat hung heavy in the air. The receptionist, a woman who had once barely acknowledged my existence, greeted me with a nervous deference. Alistair's office, once a symbol of power and success, felt like a mausoleum. The shades were drawn, casting the room in a dim, gloomy light. Alistair himself was a shadow of his former self. He sat slumped in his oversized chair, his skin pale and translucent, his eyes sunken and haunted. He looked like a man who had aged 10 years in a matter of months. Serafina, he greeted me, his voice weak. He attempted to stand, but his legs buckled, and he sank back into the chair with a groan. Don't strain yourself, I said, my voice devoid of any sympathy. I remained standing, forcing him to look up at me. I deserve this, he said, his voice filled with self-loathing. I was arrogant, blind. I pushed you away, the one person who... He trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. You made your choices, Mr. Sterling, I said, my voice cold. Now you have to live with the consequences. But I don't want to die, he whispered, his eyes pleading. Not like this. Not without making amends. I laid out my terms, my voice clear and unwavering. I can help you, Mr. Sterling. I can get you the treatment, but it will cost you. I want controlling interest in Sterling Industries, 51%, and I want Julian Sterling removed from any position of authority permanently. No severance, no golden parachute, nothing. He's out. Alistair flinched as if I'd struck him. My company? My son? Your company is on the verge of collapse, I reminded him, and your son is the one who brought it to this point. He's also the one who sabotaged the research that could save your life. Those are my terms. Take them or leave them. He struggled, his pride battling his fear of death. He looked at me, his eyes searching, desperate. He still tried to bargain, to negotiate. 49%? A board seat for Julian? No, I said, my voice like steel. 51%, and Julian is gone. Do we have a deal, Mr. Sterling? Time is running out. The threat of Titan Corp, the looming specter of Marcus Thorne, added another layer of pressure. He knew that if Thorne got his hands on the company, the research would be buried forever. Finally, with a defeated sigh, he nodded. Yes, he whispered, we have a deal. We summoned his lawyer, a pale, nervous man who looked like he hadn't slept in days. We drafted a preliminary agreement, transferring temporary controlling interest to me, pending the full legal transfer. Alistair signed it with a trembling hand, his signature barely legible. Just as the lawyer was gathering the documents, the door burst open and Julian stormed in, his face flushed with anger. What the hell is going on here? He demanded, his eyes blazing. I just got a call from legal. What have you done, father? He saw me standing there and his face contorted with rage. You, he spat. This is your doing, isn't it? You're manipulating him. He's sick. He's not thinking straight. I'm thinking more clearly than I have in years, Alistair said, his voice surprisingly firm. I've made a decision, Julian, and you are no longer a part of it. You can't do this, Julian screamed. This is my company, my inheritance. It was my company, Alistair corrected him, and you, my son, have nearly destroyed it. A heated argument erupted. Julian accused me of being a gold digger, a manipulator, a snake. He accused his father of being senile, of being tricked. He ranted and raved, his face turning purple with fury. It was during this tirade that the truth finally spilled out. You think I didn't know? Julian snarled at his father. You think I didn't know about that stupid research? That waste of money? I shut it down because it was a drain on resources. It was never going to amount to anything. You knew it was his only hope, I said, my voice dangerously low. Julian turned to me, his eyes filled with hatred. He deserves it. He never cared about me, only about his precious company. He always favored you, his perfect little assistant, over his own son. The room fell silent. Alistair stared at his son, his face a mask of shock and horror. The truth, ugly and undeniable, hung heavy in the air. Julian had not only sabotaged the research out of incompetence and greed, but out of a deep-seated resentment towards his father. Get out, Alistair said, his voice barely a whisper. Get out of my sight! Julian, momentarily stunned by his father's reaction, finally backed down. He stormed out of the office, slamming the door behind him. The preliminary papers were finalized, giving me immediate authority. I didn't waste any time. Julian was escorted from the building by security, his access cards revoked, his email account deactivated. I then addressed the remaining employees, my voice calm and confident, outlining my plan to stabilize the company and fight off the Titan Corp takeover. There was skepticism, of course, but also a glimmer of hope. They had seen what Julian had done. They were desperate for a change. My first priority was to resurrect the medical research. I called Dr. Nora Ramirez, who was, understandably, shocked to hear from me. Dr. Ramirez, I said, my name is Serafina Miles. I need to talk to you. It is about Project Chimera. That was the code name of the project that had developed the treatment. There was a brief, hesitant pause. How do you know about, Project Chimera? That information is classified? Destroyed? I know more than you think. I also know that Alistair Sterling's life depends on it, I said. Who are you? She asked, suspicious and cautious. I am someone who can help you restart your research, and someone who can help Alistair. I answered, and I am also your new boss. We arranged for a face-to-face meeting. I met with Nora in a small, secure lab I'd rented on the outskirts of the city, using my own funds. She was wary, understandably, but also desperate. She'd poured years of her life into that research, only to see it destroyed by corporate greed. Mr. Sterling, he's really sick? She asked, her voice filled with concern. Despite everything, she still cared about Alistair. He doesn't have much time, I confirmed, and your research is his only hope. I explained everything, my past life, my knowledge of the future, Alistair's condition, Julian's sabotage, and the threat from Titan Corp. I showed her the preliminary agreement, giving me control of the company. Nora was stunned, overwhelmed. But she was also a scientist, a woman of logic and reason. And she saw the evidence in front of her, my detailed knowledge of her research, my commitment to restarting it, and the desperate urgency of the situation. I don't know what to say, she stammered. This is insane. It is, I agreed, but it's also our reality. Will you help me, Dr. Ramirez? She hesitated for a moment, then nodded. Yes, she said, I will. I promised her full funding, access to the best resources, and complete protection from any interference. I also told her about Amelia's suspicions about Marcus Thorne's involvement in the sabotage. This solidified her resolve. Rebuilding the research was a monumental task. We were starting almost from scratch. Key data was missing, equipment was damaged or destroyed, and the original research team had been scattered. We had to recreate years of work in a matter of weeks. I worked tirelessly alongside Nora and her newly assembled team. I used my past life knowledge to guide them, to fill in the gaps, to accelerate the process. I leveraged my connections from my blog, reaching out to experts in various fields, soliciting their advice and assistance. I poured my own money into the project, ensuring that they had everything they needed. The challenges were relentless. We faced technical setbacks, bureaucratic hurdles, and the constant pressure of the ticking clock. Alistair's condition was deteriorating rapidly. He was now confined to a hospital bed, barely conscious, his life hanging by a thread. Titan Corp, sensing Sterling Industries' vulnerability, intensified its takeover bid. Marcus Thorne launched a public relations campaign, painting Alistair as a failed leader and Julian as a victim of circumstance. He offered a seemingly generous buyout to the remaining shareholders, promising to save the company from ruin. I fought back with every weapon at my disposal. I used my blog to expose Thorne's tactics, to rally public support for Sterling Industries, and to highlight the importance of the medical research. I met with investors, reassuring them of the company's long-term prospects. I even leaked information about Thorne's past dealings, hinting at his unethical practices. Amelia, meanwhile, continued her investigation. She uncovered a crucial piece of evidence, a series of encrypted emails between Marcus Thorne and a known corporate saboteur, discussing the elimination of a research project at Sterling Industries. The emails didn't explicitly mention Project Chimera or Alistair's condition, but the timing and the context made it clear Thorne hadn't just been opportunistic. He had actively engineered Alistair's downfall. This was the smoking gun we needed. I presented the evidence to the authorities and to the media. The resulting scandal derailed Titan Corp's takeover bid and put Thorne on the defensive. Days turned into sleepless nights. The research team, fueled by coffee and adrenaline, worked around the clock. Nora, driven by a combination of scientific passion and a growing sense of personal responsibility, pushed herself to the limit. Slowly, painstakingly, they began to make progress. They recovered fragments of the lost data, repaired the damaged equipment, and refined the experimental treatment. Then, finally, the breakthrough came. After weeks of relentless effort, they managed to synthesize a viable version of the treatment. It was a long shot, a highly experimental procedure with no guarantee of success, but it was Alistair's only chance. "It's ready," Nora said, her voice hoarse with exhaustion. "But it's risky, Serafina, very risky." "I know," I said, "but we have no choice." I authorized the treatment. I went to the hospital to Alistair's room. He was barely conscious, his breathing shallow, his body ravaged by the disease. I stood by his bedside watching him, a complex mix of emotions swirling within me: revenge, pity, resentment, and a grudging sense of responsibility. "This is it, Mr. Sterling," I whispered. "Your last chance. I hope for your sake that you've learned something from all of this." The medical team began the procedure. It was a long, tense, agonizing wait. Hours passed, and the only sounds were the rhythmic beeping of the monitors and the hushed whispers of the doctors and nurses. I stayed there, watching, waiting, praying to a God I wasn't sure I believed in. My past life, my present life, all the choices I'd made, all the risks I'd taken, had led to this moment. The fate of Alistair Sterling, of Sterling Industries, and perhaps even my own, hung in the balance. The first sign of success wasn't a dramatic announcement or a sudden surge of energy. It was a flicker of recognition in Alistair Sterling's eyes. For days, he had been lying in a semi-comatose state, his body ravaged by the disease and the experimental treatment. The doctors had warned me that even if the treatment worked, the recovery would be slow and arduous. But then, one morning, as I sat by his bedside, his eyes opened, and for the first time in weeks, they focused on me. "Serafina?" he whispered, his voice weak but clear. "I'm here, Mr. Sterling," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. He tried to smile, a faint, almost imperceptible movement of his lips. You saved me." "The doctors saved you, Mr. Sterling," I corrected him. "I just facilitated things." Over the next few weeks, Alistair slowly began to recover. He regained his strength, his mental clarity, his humility. The arrogance, the ruthlessness, The entitlement that had defined him for so long seemed to have been burned away by the fire of his illness. He was a changed man. He was also overwhelmed with gratitude towards me. He finally, truly recognized my worth, not just as an employee, but as a person. "I was a fool, Serafina," he said one afternoon as he sat propped up in his hospital bed, looking out the window at the city he had once dominated. "A blind, arrogant fool. I took you for granted. I dismissed your warnings. I trusted my idiot son instead of you." "You made mistakes, Mr. Sterling," I said, choosing my words carefully. "We all do." "But yours nearly cost me everything," he said, his voice filled with remorse. "And it cost you so much, didn't it?" I nodded, unable to speak for a moment. The memories of that previous life, the pain, the loss, the injustice, still stung. "I'm sorry, Serafina," he said, his eyes filled with tears, "for everything." It was the apology I had craved, the validation I had needed. But it didn't erase the past. It couldn't. When Alistair was strong enough, he confronted Julian. I wasn't present for that meeting, but I heard about it from Amelia, who had become my unofficial liaison within the company. It was a brutal, devastating confrontation. Alistair laid bare all of Julian's failures, his sabotage, his betrayal. He disowned him, legally and emotionally, cutting him off from the family and the company. Alistair then made a public announcement, a carefully crafted statement that acknowledged his illness, his mistakes, and his gratitude to the anonymous benefactor who had saved his life and the company. He then revealed that he was stepping down as CEO, effective immediately, and that he was appointing me, Serafina Miles, as his successor. The news sent shockwaves through the business world. The Oracle, the anonymous blogger who had predicted the crash, was now the CEO of Sterling Industries. The speculation was rampant. Who was Serafina Miles? Where did she come from? How had she done it? With Alistair's recovery and my leadership, Sterling Industries began to rebound. The stock price, which had been in free fall, stabilized and then started to climb. Investors, reassured by my track record and Alistair's endorsement, regained confidence. The employees, who had been demoralized and fearful, began to believe in the future again. But the threat from Titan Corp still loomed. Marcus Thorne, furious at being thwarted, doubled down on his efforts to discredit me and to undermine the company. He launched a smear campaign, spreading rumors about my past, questioning my qualifications, and even suggesting that I had somehow manipulated Alistair into giving me control. I ignored the personal attacks. Instead, I focused on exposing Thorne's own dirty dealings. Using the evidence Amelia had gathered, the encrypted emails, the financial records, the witness testimonies, I went public with the story of Thorne's sabotage of the medical research. I released the information through the Oracle's eye, ensuring that it reached the widest possible audience. The revelation caused a scandal. The media, which had initially been skeptical of me, turned on Thorne. The authorities launched an investigation. Titan Corp's stock price plummeted. Shareholders revolted. Thorne's takeover bid collapsed. He was forced to resign as CEO, and he faced multiple lawsuits and potential criminal charges. Sterling Industries and Titan Corp became bitter rivals, their feud fueled by personal animosity and corporate warfare. It was a conflict that would likely continue for years to come, a potential source of future challenges and storylines. Julian's fate was less dramatic, but perhaps more tragic. He was left with nothing, no family, no fortune, no future. He tried to retaliate against me, launching a series of frivolous lawsuits and spreading malicious rumors online. But his efforts were pathetic and easily dismissed. He was a broken man, consumed by bitterness and resentment. I considered offering him some form of assistance, a chance at redemption. But I realized that he wasn't ready for it. He was still clinging to his entitlement, his belief that he deserved everything he had lost. He needed to hit rock bottom before he could even begin to climb back up. Perhaps someday he would find his way. Or perhaps he would become a permanent cautionary tale, a reminder of the dangers of arrogance and unchecked ambition. I left open several possibilities for him: disappearing completely, becoming a minor, recurring antagonist, or in a very long-term arc, seeking redemption.